I'm really excited about being a part of Avocado Labs for today. And as Sam and Anna shared, really excited as well to get you content over to your homes digitally, especially during COVID. Hope everyone's staying safe. And I'll just start screen sharing to share my presentation, um, which was built with MDX Deck. It's a really sweet technology for um, creating really nice keynotes. So it also gives me the advantage that I can share a link with you all. Avocado-labs.vercel.app is where I deployed it. And you can obviously open it from the comfort of your homes and follow along, and also get the content to share with everybody else later. So I want to talk about something that's very dear to my heart, which is front-end development. My background, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/RauchG. My background is in developing JavaScript dev tools from way back in the day when I started working on MooTools, which is a competitor to jQuery. Later on, I worked on a multitude of Node.js related projects like Socket.io and Mongoose, which I published to NPM, and they kind of become core pillars of the JavaScript ecosystem. But nowadays, I focus on React and what we created, which is Next.js, the most or one of the most popular frameworks for taking React to production. And as of recently, Next.js has become a really great way for us to package and deliver JAMstack techniques and JAMstack best practices. So what I'm going to talk about today is, first, I'm going to make the case that it's the best time ever to be a front-end developer, thanks to JAMstack. Later on, I'm going to talk about, okay, how do I get all these best practices and all these ideas in a box, which is why we created Next.js. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use it and why we think that, or how we think that JAMstack should be used in production, and what are the best practices to doing so, and so on. So what you can take from this presentation is not just some philosophy, but also how to use JAMstack in the best possible way for your next project. So the reason that I got really, really excited about JAMstack, and as I shared just now, my background was in a lot of different things: infrastructure, backend, front end, but I was kind of interested in many, many things. But the thing that stood out to me about JAMstack is that economically, it makes a really big difference. So you've probably heard that CDNs, edge networks, take kind of a central role of the JAMstack thesis. And the reason is that if you take some time to pre-render your pages, you can then later on push them to a CDN. And this seems like something small, and a lot of people talk about how, like, oh, well, I already had a CDN, I can have a CDN with my server. And if you're very interested in kind of the topic of why JAMstack makes CDNs actually very, very different, I wrote a blog post called Static Hoisting, and it's very, very technical. But the core idea is that because we pre-render, we can make lots of automatic optimizations that go well hand in hand with how a CDN works. And when it comes to you thinking about this in terms of your next project, your job, your, kind of making the next big thing, well, CDNs and pre-rendering will make everything faster. Therefore, you can convert more customers. This is the emoji that I chose for what a customer becomes when they convert to Pro or some paid tier of your website. If you're focusing on e-commerce, you get to sell more. It's well documented that every 100 milliseconds of performance improvement meant a lot more revenue for sites like Amazon. And even though I don't love ads, if you're building your next big content website, all these JAMstack things are going to have a very large economical impact. And for a development tool or a development mindset or a development stack, I think it's really, really exciting, because we tend not to focus a lot on things that we can measure. We now have an opportunity to say, well, we get to not only choose our favorite front end stack, but we also get to make a huge difference in terms of how businesses work. And another really interesting side of this that goes beyond, okay, how the page works, is it fast or not, and and whatnot, is that we get to do a lot less. And this is kind of what I'm gonna spend some time talking about today, is this idea that we can do less and accomplish more. We literally get to be, just more efficient with our time and how we employ our resources at our companies. So one of the first pieces of that is that in my mind, backend is becoming less interesting. I have a typo there. So backend is becoming less interesting for numerous reasons. But one is that with JAMstack, reusing the API part, the A in JAMstack, is now quite easy, quite frankly. So we have the rise of the headless CMS, where we can decouple the CMS, and therefore we can now buy it off the shelf. If you remember when DHH introduced Ruby on Rails, the first thing he built was a full stack blog engine. And when I think about, okay, what does the Ruby on Rails of our generation look like? Well, obviously I'm biased and I think about Next.js. And I actually think about the fact that Next.js doesn't reinvent a blog engine from scratch. Most likely when you use Next.js, especially if you go through our tutorial by clicking learn, we're gonna walk you through creating a blog, but you're not gonna build, a CMS from scratch. You can reuse excellent CMSs that are in the ecosystem already, like Contentful, Strapi, Sanity, and so on. And this is also true for e-commerce. So I mentioned earlier that I think JAMstack is absolutely fascinating for improving performance of sales on the internet. And I think when I'm going to build an e-commerce website, I'm not going to think about building the e-commerce API. I'm not going to think about building the checkout API. Funny enough, last night I stayed up a little too late deploying this JAMstack e-commerce example that Nader David worked on, and I deployed it Vercel. And when you think about how this website works, which is built with Gatsby, all these products can be retrieved from a headless e-commerce website, e-commerce API. And then when it comes to transacting, it uses a Stripe. So like this is entirely built, interestingly enough, of very simple, efficient, and solid backend infrastructure that we didn't have to write from scratch. So I'm going to show you very briefly how I was able to take this Gatsby example. I added an API function that also Nader kind of provided the template for. And then I'm talking to Stripe over here. I didn't have to create any of this backend infrastructure. I can use serverless functions to sort of connect to this incredible backend infrastructure and kind of create some glue code here. My backend in this case is like literally 80 lines of code, because all I'm doing is deferring to existing backend APIs. So this is also true for our hosts today, the incredible DevRel team at Auth0, right? Like nowadays, who thinks of writing, logging, identity, auditing, enterprise SSO solutions from scratch? We get to use Auth0, which is freaking awesome. And even for like more and bigger backend endeavors, we're seeing the rise of services that'll just give us a GraphQL API from our database schema. So we don't even write anything. We don't even write the functions at all. So the category here, like Fauna and Hasura, some PostgreFile, some exciting projects that are coming up with, here's the API to your database. You didn't even write your backend at all. So hopefully I made the case that, backend is not that it's becoming less interesting in itself. I think obviously if you work for Auth0, is the most exciting thing in the universe. I agree. Obviously, if you work for Vercel, we work on backend infrastructure every day to host your websites. But you can now basically get to reuse it and get it off the shelf, which is very, very exciting. So what I think is an interesting remaining challenge is, okay, I buy into all this. I love the economical aspect. It's going to make everything faster. It's going to make me a lot less stressed with monitoring and observability because it's all pre-rendered. It's all at the edge. I don't have to maintain any servers. I don't have to maintain any load balancers. I don't have to maintain any caches, Varnish, Redis, Memcache. I throw it all away. I throw it all away. So what is the remaining challenge? In my mind, the remaining challenge is that JAMstack is like LAMP was back in the day, where, okay, some, rough description of a stack. Some people don't even agree on the full definition. Some people don't even agree on how to spell it, like whether jam is all uppercase or not. So what is the remaining challenge? In my mind, the remaining challenge is that we should be able to kind of condense all these best practices and deliver them at scale with from 1 page to 1 billion pages without having to think too much about the stack itself. And this is kind of the opportunity that has been created for Next.js. So not only I think it's economically exciting because of the JAMstack side of things, but we're also focusing a lot on this idea, first of all, embedding the best practices out of the box. So for example, when Next.js is built for production, it comes with a lot of super interesting JavaScript optimizations, some of which were contributed by Google. But also the other interesting aspect is the low code aspect, is that with Next.js, you literally get to write very little code. So to unpack a little bit, I get to reuse the API. I don't have to write it. Awesome. And now I also get to write my front end with the least amount of code possible. And I think that's super, super exciting. So we go more into that with the Next.js tutorial. But one of the things that's exciting is like you start, your Next.js app, and then when it comes to like starting to add bits of code, you realize that you actually write very, very little code. You just write your React components and your data fetching functions, and you're kind of off to the races. And speaking of data fetching functions, one of the things that I kind of want to share with you today is there's millions of ways of using powerful technologies like React. But when it comes to using them in combination with JAMstack, there are some best practices that we've used at Vercel to build our website and our dashboard that I wanted to share with you today. So if you're not entirely familiar with how our system works, so Vercel is the easiest way to deploy any JAMstack website or application in the world. You basically just focus on your code, you push, and you get a URL every time you create a pull request, a push, a branch, or a push to master. So this very URL that I have today, avocadolabs.vercel.app, I deploy to our Edge network. I actually did so right before this talk. You see my code here. Any project that is JAMstack compatible, basically that has a build process, is an excellent fit for the Vercel network. And then in combination with, we maintain this website, we maintain our blog, we maintain our documentation. We also have a powerful dashboard where you can sort of take a look at your deploys, take a look at your websites. Our own very website is deployed and managed through Vercel. But for example, actually, let me show you the website that I deployed last night that I was telling you about. So obviously I have my Avocado Labs website here that I deployed. And last night I deployed an e-commerce website. So it's pretty exciting how productive I can be in terms of publishing stuff online. But so how is this all built, right? Like this is a very interesting application. It's very dynamic, very real time. As a matter of fact, just here I was pulling data in real time out of what my coworkers are doing while I'm out here giving this presentation. And on the other hand, we have kind of this website that contains our landing pages that explain to you how everything works. It explains why why you should deploy Next.js to us and like all this kind of things. So this all came together through our JAMstackification, if you will. So Next.js back in the day used to be laser sharp focused on SSR. But then we realized that JAMstack would give us a very significant performance improvement. So we started thinking about like, okay, how do we use Next.js in the best possible way for JAMstack? So some of the best practices that we learned are JAMstack gave us a lot of speed. It allowed us to not reinvent the wheel. It allows us to give our users the best possible experience. So by using JAMstack and just focusing on a very lean usage of React and React hooks. And by the way, we only have one Next.js app that governs our entire website. So notice that like when I was transitioning between kind of our marketing pages, our documentation, this is all based on a global Next.js application that actually gets to share a design system, which is a really beautiful thing. So Next.js governs the whole thing. I'm going to show you some code really quick. What's exciting about this is that you get to we get to peel behind the layers a little bit of how this all works. So the only requirement that a Next.js application has, and Cassidy is also going to go through this later on, is that there's pages. All you need to do is create a pages directory and put some pages in there. Each page exports a React component, and that's basically how everything works. The more pages you have, your website doesn't become slower because it's optimized for collaboration. And when we deploy this application, we deploy it all at once. So if you look at our project here, which is called Front, the latest we rolled to production just 2 hours ago, and you can see here kind of the list of preview deploys. Everyone is just kind of working on different improvements. Like let's take a look at this. Like Paco is working on improving the team name branch. All he had to do was work on some pages of this Next.js application. So one of the frustrations that I had early on with React that sort of gave rise to the creation of Next.js was that it was very, very hard to make decisions with it, to get started with it. It felt like in order to be productive with the tool, which is, in my opinion, what we should focus on, especially now with JAMstack, is, okay, I got rid of the backend workload. Let's be really productive and efficient on the front end side of things. So React was an incredibly promising technology that, in my opinion, didn't deliver on that kind of productivity. And actually, funny enough, React doesn't. So React at Facebook is not really used in a Jamstack manner. So Facebook has a very sophisticated backend, actually written in PHP, or what they later evolved into Hack. So we can't really take Facebook's approach to React and download it and start a quick app. And that didn't really resonate well with me, because I was like, okay, React is a super exciting component, but I want to build everything with React. I want to build, our design system with React. I want to build our marketing pages with React. I want to build our single page applications or dashboards with React. So how do I do that? Well, I was basically this guy right here, like not really knowing what to do. So, but Next.js kind of in some ways also inherits some of the power of React, right? And power, and I don't mean to say this, like Next.js is powerful, and I'm not trying to brag. I'm saying when you have a tool that is as powerful as React, and you build a tool on top, you inherit a lot of that power, right? So one of the things that I want to kind of wrap around with this presentation is, how can you use power in the most responsible manner possible, such that you accomplish your goals and you create a fast and easy to maintain website? So when code is involved, problems arise. This is kind of my understanding of the world today is, the minute you put in code, you create a liability in some ways. And you've seen this with, Lighthouse is actively punishing the amount of JS that you ship today. SSR is actually very hard to do because it runs code for every request, right? So this is kind of one of the innovations of JAMstack, is that it said, okay, if you do your SSR quote unquote at build time, you get some important, you de-risk your project in some ways. So the areas in which code can run are several, right? So you can run code at build time, you can generate pages, you can run it on demand, you can run it on the client side. So there's a lot of opportunity to get things wrong. So great power, great responsibility. And one of the interesting things about power is that power will make you slow if you don't use it correctly. So it's well known that a universal Turing machine can, not be statically analyzed to determine if it'll halt, because you actually have to run through the program to determine this. So I don't mean to terrify you, but one day you'll have a halting problem in one of your programs that run code, and your program will, pause forever, and you'll get a blue screen of death or something like that. But obviously, while this doesn't really happen to us on a day-to-day basis, it kind of illustrates a problem at large. if you run code, you're opening a Pandora box. And our priorities at Vercel really have always been about just making things fast and smooth for the customer. And we were progressively moving away from that, kind of razor sharp focused on SSR, because it was starting to get, in the way of what we wanted to deliver to this customer. So our technical priorities were security, availability, performance, and developer experience. And this is the lens through which we analyze every technical decision that we make for anything that we do. Security first and foremost, availability meaning being online, performance meaning being fast. And interestingly, even though we're known for giving people great developer experiences, this really is the last item on our priority list. And funny enough, another big motivation for moving away from any legacy way of producing your front end to JAMstack was that a lot of these things come with JAMstack out of the box. And then the developer experience portion comes from Next.js. And obviously it embodies all those JAMstack best practices. So one of my realizations throughout this process was I need to get rid of all code. And we're still in the process of doing so. So I like this quote a lot by Tim Sweeney from Epic Games, creator of Fortnite, obviously an authority in programming. He says that basically it's almost impossible to write correct code, and this has become my default attitude towards code. Code is so hard to get right. I want to get rid of all of it. Thank you. So number one strategy is delete all your code. Number one thing is run less code. Number three is if you absolutely have to run code, run it at build time. And then if you also have to run code, run it on the client side. And if you follow this while you're using Next.js, I think you're gonna get to some really successful outcomes. And really, again, this strategy is all about embodying kind of this JAMstack philosophy. So I'm going to share some tips of how we apply this in practice that you're going to be able to follow with your own projects when you use Next.js or when you even use other frameworks. So what we did is we got rid of SSR. So how do we do this? We got rid of get initial props, which was a data fetching hook. If you don't use it, Next.js will automatically produce HTML, which is really, really exciting. So to give you an example of that is our homepage, vercel.com/home, never runs any code because we don't do any top-level data fetching, which means Next.js doesn't ever have to do any SSR. And this literally exists as an HTML file that gets globally replicated in our Edge network. That's very, very exciting. So if you look at, if we go back, actually, I'm going to just navigate thanks to the power of Next.js. And if you look at our build process for our website, you're going to see that it kind of outputs a bunch of pages, right? And we have this really interesting convention when we show you the logs that kind of shows you what we are building. And if you go to the sort of the legend underneath, let me find it, you're going to see that a lot of these pages, which have that little circle that says static, so a lot of these are just being built as HTML, which is really, really, really exciting. So for example, /security, /open source. Okay, let's go visit that. So this simple page, Next.js, when we run the build process, said, well, you know what? There's no reason to like put this inside a server. There's no reason to put it inside a container. It's just a static HTML. So we got rid of the servers and we moved into HTML pages. Very exciting. We actually used to use CSS in JS a lot. And it was, if any of you were part of the very early days of Next.js, Next.js even embedded a CSS in JS solution way back in the day called Glamour. But then we switched to CSS, which I called a no-code solution because CSS is pretty much a very JAMstack technology in my mind because it's static in nature, is statically optimizable by the web browser. It's fast and lean and very easy to optimize by the browser engine. It's very much like, HTML and CSS go together, not just because they're awesome technologies, but also in this spirit of, let's call it Turing incompleteness, or this idea that, HTML and CSS alone are quite hard to make slow or insecure. It's one of the core tenets of our priority system that I just outlined, even for theming. So let me see if I can show you. Okay, so I'm going to go to the dashboard again. I'm going to switch the theme to system, and I'm going to change it over here with my iPad. You're going to see that our theme just like sort of automatically moved to dark mode. And the beauty of this is that, again, the operating system signaled the switching of the theme, and then all our CSS variables changed, and then the browser was in charge of repainting the whole thing. And what's awesome about it is that I didn't have to write any code, and just leverage the code that the engineers at WebKit were hard at work on producing and optimizing, which is a beautiful, again, economical benefit of this stack. And a lot of people ask, oh, can I use Next.js with Redux? Can I use Next.js with this? Can I use Next.js with that? An interesting thing about Vercel is that we don't use any fancy state anything. We just use React. So obviously there's code involved in using React. It's not, pure HTML, but we never added the tax of, oh, this is how we do state, this is our global store, this is a thing, and that. And this is a pretty complex website with lots and lots of code, with people working on it a lot, with lots of real-time features. In fact, I can show you a little bit of our traffic streaming in real time for this particular deploy. Like you can see, like these are all the requests that are being executed and whatnot. It's a very real-time system, very performant, and yet it doesn't use any fancy React things. And that also is true for data fetching strategy. So we don't have any complex clients or bundles of clients. We just use fetch. And the other thing we learned is that in the beginning, we're kind of trying to reinvent the wheel with our design system. And we love having beautiful components. But what we love more is having beautiful components that also reuse the HTML and CSS platform and don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. So for example, our select, there was a lot of temptation early on to make our select inputs. Let me find one. Here. There was a lot of temptation to make this a fancy React component design system, blah, blah, hashtag design. But what we did is we styled the outside of it. We turned that into a React component, but then it uses a native browser here. So think about all the code that it got rid of. And on iPad, it renders beautifully. And iPad, like that said, I'm going to render it this way, and then your desktop will render it another way, and the world is great. So we deleted a lot of code, and we sleep better at night. So the TLDR is use the platform, the web platform, the React platform. And this is true also for when I was talking about like how we moved away from server-side render into static-side generation. We moved away from computing every time. Think of SSR as a technology that every time you go to a page, you're spending some electricity in a data center because some server is being activated to serve your requests. We moved to compute once and share. So it's a very, very, funny enough, it's a green technology. So I like it. Like we moved a lot of the heavy lifting to build time. So a great example of that is our blog. Let me go to it really quick. It's statically generated, but it's statically generated at build time from a dynamic data source. So compare that with the server's rendering world where, all this was, again, you go and then you go to Contentful. You go to the page, you go to Contentful, and then you realize, oh, I'm going to Contentful too frequently. I'm going to add a cache, and then you set up Redis or Varnish or whatever. So instead, what you can do is like use Next.js to use a static site generation, which, by the way, again, we discussed here in the tutorial. So feel free to, again, go to nextjs.org and go through Learn. And now you move to computing once and share. We also got to move from the region to the edge, which is also very exciting. So let's go back again and consider this beautiful page. It's just this blog post that I generated statically at build time. I'm going to go and perform a quick performance check of it. So I was able to do a DNS lookup TCP connection, SSL handshake, server processing, content transfer in 95 milliseconds. It was automatically cached by the Vercel network, and I never ever had to worry about a server. I never had to worry about cache control. I never had to worry about purges. I never had to worry about Redis and Varnish and load balancers. All I did was take advantage of static site generation thanks to Next.js. And then when I pushed to the Edge network, I got these amazing performance benefits. And again, this is pretty wild. Like 95 milliseconds is what, let's compare with Google. Google is 130. We just beat Google. That's awesome. So, and this was as simple as if you're already experienced with Next.js, there was a property data fetching hook called getting your props. All we had to do was move it to get static props. That's it. Then we moved from CSS in JS to CSS, as I mentioned. We moved from themes to CSS variables. We don't have to use any React context. We moved from SSR to client-side data fetching whenever we needed to fetch data that is not shared by all users. So this is shared by all users, but I mentioned earlier that we have things like our dashboard. I can't pre-compute this and cache it at the edge, right? That's why notice that when I refresh, you see that skeleton. So that means that I have to do data fetching on the client side. So we moved to the client side for that when we have user personalized or private data, also making our system more secure, by the way. And again, like the parts that were static, we could make static. And at runtime, we use fetch in combination with a little React library for data fetching that we built called SWR. So this is just using React hooks in combination with fetch. It's very, very simple. And what I love about this, by the way, is that when you fetch code, it literally looks synchronous, right? It says, I'm going to render a profile. I'm going to fetch this data, and then you handle the status of that data. It's very, very simple and very effective. And the funny thing about that, by the way, is that our entire system is built like that. So notice that when I go to /home, this logged in state is deferred a little bit. That's because SWR is kicking in on the client side and it's saying, I'm going to fetch the user state. Yeah, so SWR, I highly, highly recommend it. I believe it was 2 kilobytes minimized and gzipped. This is the only layer on top of React that we use for making hooks more palatable, and it allows us to kind of use fetch in a way that is pleasant. It allows us to reuse our data fetching between the team, and then just make really, really compelling web experiences with that. And the benefits are just plentiful. As I mentioned, we don't have global stores. The code looks beautiful. It works with any backend that you write. So going back to the beginning of my presentation, when I pointed out that you can now, in the JAMstack economy, reuse any API in the world. SWR, we call it JAMstack data fetching because of that, because I can now use it in combination with any backend that exists. Yeah, so this is it. I just gave you a quick tour of how we use JAMstack at Vercel, how to use Next.js in the most effective way possible. Luckily for you, Cassidy is also going to go through some of these patterns next as well. So if you want to get it started with JAMstack in general and or Next.js, we put together this tutorial where you build your own blog, and then you can let us know. By the way, funny thing, you can let us know how many points you get. Oh, I'm logged out of Twitter, I believe, so I'm not going to be able to show you. Actually, let me see real quick if I can show you. So when you finish the tutorial, you can share with the world how many points you got. So, for example, Sonu earlier this morning got 185 points on our tutorial. Mad props to him. And you're going to be building a really sweet blog through that process. So when it comes to building any website that is JAMstack compatible and you want to push it to the edge to get the performance benefits that I outlined earlier, you just import your repo to Vercel. once you import your repo, so you can import any Git repository that you own, or you can deploy a template. You're just going to get your site here, and you can share it with the rest of the world. And yeah, if you want to stay in touch, or if you have any follow-ups, if you want to tell me something, if you want to give me any feedback, you can reach out to me on twitter.com/Rauch. And I believe also that the Avocado Labs team will ask me some questions now.